I can't hear anything.
Neither can I. Can you hear me?
I can hear.
Yeah, I can't hear nobody on that council. I don't know if that's normal. What do we do?
Thank you. Well, if it's not for the G2, you can talk. And then, okay. And we'll see you on G2. Okay.
Move on.
Yeah, she's gonna do it on the next one.
Doug Johnson is signed up, but I don't know what for.
We'll get you out when we start talking about that, okay? We won't forget you guys. We're working on an order here.
Our next person is Rachel Parker. I'm here just for support. So you're not doing a public comment? No, I didn't. Okay. How about Jalen? Is it?
It's Parrot, yeah, I'm not here to comment, I'm just
Okay,
also here to
thank
support.
you. How about Dean Jewett?
Good evening. So I just want to chat about a cleanup that's been happening on Highway 3 that's been long overdue. A lot of rumors swirling, a lot of misinformation, a lot of angry people. This last Sunday, we had a collaboration between Recovery Cafe individuals, some homeless people, and a group that Dee's Custom Woodwork put together. It was a great collaboration. After we got through with some conversations, we ended up removing almost 4,000 pounds of garbage from the hill. That added to probably another 5,000 on the third cleanup that was done. So we got almost 10,000 pounds of garbage off of that hill. There's probably 5% of what's there. That might be an exaggeration as well. But what I wanted to talk about is there's our water, sewer, trash bill in Shelton. If you open up your bill, you look at it, it's really super high, right? So we put a bunch of money into our sewer system, into our treatment plant. But so that's all treated water treated stuff going into Open Bay. So did you know that the average human being in the United States produces 1,700 pounds of waste per year? So if we have 50 people on the other side of the railroad tracks and up on that bank, over a year of 50 people, at that number, that's 85,000 pounds of untreated waste up on that hill. Okay, did you know that a 5-gallon bucket can contaminate 13 acres of shellfish? What do we have all around there? What did we just, say that Taylor could do out there with all the shellfish? So, if you do the math on that, that's 3,400 buckets of raw human waste running off that hill into the bay. So did we really need to do all that work on the sewers? Or is this a big impact as to what happens to our waters? So I want you to think about that. I'd like to see a proactive approach on policing, and that can be driven from you guys talking with the police chief, the police captain. There are numerous businesses that have no trespassing letters on file. And there are numerous officers that go by those buildings that are being trespassed and or damage vandalism being done on them. And it would be nice to see those buildings taken a look at on a proactive basis. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next round.
Thank you.
There is a gentleman, Andrew Freeman, signed up. Pardon me?
G2, okay, thank you. Donna, does anyone online want to talk about general public
Yes.
comment?
James Hirsch wants to do a general public comment on Zoom.
Ready for James? James?
Yes, my name is. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, sorry about that. With the help of the case management and it was able to help me out a lot being there and like with displaced and homeless people.
James,
Nobody,
just for community lifeline support.
yes.
Okay, we're gonna talk about this here in a little bit. Can you just hold on? We'll get back to
Okay.
you. We're on general public comment right now, and we have something on our agenda for community lifeline tonight.
Yeah,
You can just hang
I'll
on.
wait for community lifeline support. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, that's it for general public comment.
Oh, okay. Want to start back with James then? Oh, no, never mind. We're not there yet. Okay, so there's nobody else for general public comment tonight? All right. We have 3 presentations this evening. Our first is an LTAC report from Liz Arball from our museum. Or her museum, I guess. I guess her museum, I guess.
Our museum, yes. So, this is my 4th quarter report, 2024. There we have a lovely picture of the Hood Sport School. In 1949, it was torn down, I think, in 1984. When they consolidated, but this ties into our next exhibit, but next slide, please. I will get there in a minute. So quarter 4 totals, we had 460 visitors, which is a little bit on the lower side. A lot of times we get extra visitors through the Halloween spectacular, but the weather was so bad that we probably only had like 20 people come through. But we also had people from 10 states, Arizona, Minnesota, New York, Alaska, and then also from Switzerland, Great Britain, and from Canada. Next slide, please. So with Facebook, we reach about 3,500 people, and that was about a 15% increase. Probably our most popular post was about our exhibit that we're just wrapping up now about Clarence Beauchamp and his artistry. And always, if we post a photo, it gets a lot of attention, which I think is really fun. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, and we had 2 events in the last quarter. One was about from Washington Humanities, having on the half shell. And the other one was about the someone who wrote a book about the night before Christmas. Okay, so we had about 1,100 unique users on our website. Our most popular purchase again was the artist colony on Good Now. Next slide, please. So we have an annual fund drive, and our goal for this year was $15,000, and we came in. Well, actually, right now we're just a little over $29,000, and that is our membership and community members. And a lot of times we'll have like big corporate support, but this was all just personal donations, which I think is just astounding. We have everything from like a $10 donation to a $5,000 donation.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm really happy. Next slide, please. We are finally updating our walking tour map. I got the final draft today. And so it's just has a newer, fresher look to it. And it's updated because the Jan Parker, who writes the articles, the journal, also was like, no, they cut down those trees that were on the walking tour map, so we had to fix them. So that should probably be, it'll probably be in a month before we get it distributed. Next slide. And this is our next exhibit that we are working on now. We are looking at Mason County schools, more than just a building, because these early schools were community centers. They'd have dances until 3 in the morning. You know, kids would get to Gerald Cove school by boat. That was so it's pretty fun. We're having too much fun researching it. It's going really slow. And that's the last one. Okay, one thing I just wanted to mention, I wanted to acknowledge the good work that the Shelton Police Department is doing. I've had way more interactions with them in the last couple of years than I've had in the previous years that we've lived here. And there was a little incident at the museum, no big deal, but you know, they're very professional. They handled it quickly. And we're really happy to have them. And are there any questions?
Thank you. Congratulations on your fundraiser. That's awesome.
Thank
It's
you.
double. All right. We have another presentation from Deidre Peterson with the Shelton Mason County Chamber of Commerce.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. I also have a fourth quarter report for Lodging Tax Committee, which I think we have up here in a moment. And I just want to say thank you to Liz for the Shelton Historic Walking Tours map, because that is one of the 2 most popular brochures that we run through. And it's great to see something that's so focused on our downtown core. So lovely picture of Tolly all lit up, and a shout out to our friends who provided all of the greenery for that was donated, almost 300 feet of greenery to decorate the caboose. So again, thank you community for helping us have a beautiful downtown for the Christmas season and help welcome folks in. So go ahead and start the presentation. Next slide. Taking a look at October through December, this chart actually looks at not only our office, but the Hoodsport Visitor Center. So the grants that we get from the county and the city and the Park Service all go to support visitor services across our area of the county. And you'll see there the different maps and passes that we sell. Most importantly, though, of course, folks are looking at the visitor count. So in fourth quarter alone, we had just over 1,100 visitors, which was slightly down from 2023. Again, as Liz mentioned, weather was definitely a factor around holidays. It's spectacular this year, but it's still up almost 30% over 2019 or our pre-pandemic numbers. Phone calls were way down this time, but we've seen a lot more interaction via email, of course, social media, etc. So it's not surprising. Next slide. Our Facebook page there, you can see some of our top posts, the holiday happenings, of course, the Guinness Tribute Maze and all of the holiday activities. A huge shout out to Shelton Downtown Merchants and Christmastown Kiwanis for putting together just an incredible array of events. And Rachel Hansen and the crew with Mason County Tourism really worked with us to gather what was happening where. So folks were calling saying, we're bringing family down from BC. We're traveling over after we stop at Leavenworth. We're going to pop up from north of Seattle. We were able to each weekend post, here's all the things happening this weekend in one place. And it seemed to be very popular. And then for the Hoodsport, our most popular post was discover the perfect stocking stuffer. And that was discover passes, $5 Christmas tree permits, etc. Next slide. Just saying, look at the Google landing page. Of course, most folks are on their phone. I always find it fascinating to see how people are looking for us. And with the caboose, number one, they're looking for attractions, second, visitor center. And then we've got, historical houses pops up on the list, which I find interesting because thankfully no one lives there. That would be really quite ramped. We do have a 4.5 star rating on there, and the Google ratings that we have allow us to interact with guests as well. So you'll see after Zach Hansen and Dwayne Wilson's family and all the other community folks came out to really give Tolly a shine and do a lot of work to make that beautiful. There's a lot of new photos posted to that profile, which is great to see. Next slide. Hoodsport, of course, is the crown jewel for visitor centers for us, almost 1,800 views just during fourth quarter. We have a lot of click-throughs to phone calls on that. Typically, it's folks asking if certain areas are open, if they need multiple maps and passes for where they're planning to visit, and what else there is to do in the area. And that's one thing that's great about the Hoodsport Visitor Center is as folks are doing the loop, we can hopefully draw them off and redirect them into activities that are happening in town as well. So next slide. Special events, you will see if you look at our visitors count, it going up and down around event weekends, particularly Oyster Fest, of course, is a huge regional draw, but we also have folks that come from a camper that comes from Florida every year, brings his RV. They're stopping at our gas stations, they're patronizing our restaurants. So even when there are large events that are held just outside of town, we do have an economic impact of that. And so we get a lot of phone calls asking about what's happening. And then smaller community events like Spooktacular downtown, of course, the Holiday Magic Parade and such. The tree maze is always a big deal. It's on King 5 again this year, which garnered a lot of attention, which was great to see. And next slide. Types of visitors, of course, we have local folks, Seattle, Gig Harbor, Edmonds, Forks, Olympia, out of state. And again, this is just fourth quarter, Oregon, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Ohio, New York, Georgia, Florida, and Texas. And this year we had a few folks from out of the country, including Canada and the Netherlands. And those are just the ones that sign into our logs. We try to capture that. As you noticed, Liz said they had a couple of from Switzerland. They actually stopped in our office and visited. They didn't sign the log. They're not on this list. But there's been some really great folks coming in to visit. And usually it's surrounding, they're either connecting to the 101 loop and heading down to California. They're doing the 101 loop up and around, or they're coming in from out of the country. And so it's nice to see people tapping into our small town charm as they're visiting the area. And last slide, I think, is just a pretty picture of our beautiful downtown. So any questions from council regarding the fourth quarter visitor services from the chamber?
No, thank you.
It's wonderful. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much, Deidre. Okay, and now we're at park, no, where are we? No business items, sorry. We have a presentation from Mike Giddens. Sorry, I lost track of my page.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. This is the December financial report. So a look at our fiscal year, if you will, and where we ended. I think it's important to spend a little bit of time on this so that we can really reflect on kind of where we're at and where we're headed. We'll really want to make clear where the revenue's coming from, where the expenses are going as we move towards the council retreat this spring and looking at budget priorities and service levels for the future. So we have a study session slated next month to dive into this in a little bit more detail, not just specifically December, but kind of looking at things overall. So as we close out the fiscal year, we'll begin working on the annual financial report. It's due towards the end of May. By law, we have to submit that to the state auditor that culminates and brings everything together for the financial presentation of the city. The overall picture won't change much. There might be a couple of balancing items between funds. I don't anticipate anything, but as we put things together, sometimes there's a couple of journal entries that have to happen. But for the most part, I would tell you that the revenue on the general fund side of things shouldn't change. We will be audited this fall for fiscal year 2024. So we just completed the audit for 2022 and 2023, and they've committed to auditing us annually, which from our financial perspective is much better than having to think back almost 3 years in some cases when we're looking at the audit. So we'll pretty much just turn around from this audit we finished and then annually be in an audit during the fall. It should be shorter though, since they're just focusing on one fiscal year. So as we look at the December financial report, I wanted to point out that the adopted budget assumed that expenditures would exceed revenue by $308,000. The actual showed that the general fund revenue exceeded expenditures by $1.1 million. That's a lot higher than we expected. Some reasons that are attributable to this: I make very conservative revenue estimates on those lines where we have some known quantities, sales tax, business and occupation tax. One of the things that would cause us financial hardship is if we overestimated those revenues and they came in less, that would put us in a cutting situation. And sometimes you don't know until it's too late in those cases, which is an even worse financial position to be in. So all in all, on the areas where I estimate taxes, we weren't far off. I think the places where we had over budget were really one-time revenues. So donations, grants, and then our permits and fees that were coming in pretty strong last year. But again, that's one-time revenue. We budget a certain amount, and where that lands actually, we just don't know. At the supplemental budget that you approved in December, we didn't bring in some of that revenue because then that would set the kind of bar higher. So we're just letting it go over budget. We can do that. Expenses can't go over budget, but revenue can. And so that's why that ended up in such a positive, which, you know, from the finance side of things, we're never going to complain about having over budget on revenue. I think this was unusual in that we really did see quite a bit. The opioid money is an example. The permitting on the new construction that we've had is an example of that. So that's that one-time money.
It's the opiate money in this total fund balance.
It is not now.
Oh, it's
No.
not now.
It's in the, we wanted to get that out of the general fund, so it wasn't just hanging there.
Okay.
So that got moved over to the capital fund where we're accounting for it separately. It's not to be spent on capital, but it's in that resources fund so that we can track it separately, and it really gives you a picture of where the ending fund balance is.
And then out of this unreserved fund balance, we've used almost half of this or for 2025 already,
We're
correct?
gonna use about 1.2 million of it, correct? So the number that I'm looking at that is important in predicting where expenditures are going is on page 1 here, the page I have up on screen. If you look at the second line down, the net revenue shows that expenditures were within just about $203,000 of budget. Now that's after we made a couple of transfers, the 1 year, speaking of Mayor, but that goes to show kind of that slim margin we have on our expenditure budget, which we want to spend it, right? We're here to operate a city, but ideally that's about 1%. Ideally, we're seeing maybe closer to 3%. So that's really where we'll be looking at kind of the pressure on our budget is those expenditures are spending out at that level. Now, we had some underspending. The jail is an example where we budget that at, it came in under, but that's an unknown every year. We have to keep that budget at that level, and then where the actual expenses fall, we just don't, it's one we can't predict. I mentioned that we made some transfers. One of the things that I will tell you, I think the city manager and I rest a little bit easier on is we have transferred some money to our, I mentioned that capital resources fund. That's a place where we can go should the general fund need an unusual expense. So say the roof on the city hall, the civic center needed to be replaced. That's probably $1 million project, give or take a bit. We have that set aside. So if we're faced with that, we can come to you and budget that. Because imagine $1 million or even a $750,000 hit on this general fund budget, it just can't absorb it. So I'm sharing that with you that's good planning. We're in a good position with regard to that. Should our infrastructure that is funded by the general fund need some kind of work, we have that set aside. We also, for 2025, put aside some money for future leases on our vehicles that we're in. So should the fund not be able to carry that forward at some time, that's set aside. I share that with you again because I think that is something for us to really rely on. And as we're planning and looking at this general fund, really take a look at, okay, what are our ongoing needs and make sure that that revenue can match the expenses. And there could be infrastructure needs that come up that we're not planned for, but we have that amount set aside should we need it. Per policy, we strive to maintain the 20% reserved balance of the general fund. And as a reminder, that's an amount for emergencies that we might not anticipate, an economic downturn. It also allows us to meet our expenses at those times where our revenue's down. We have a bank balance, so we don't have to go out and undertake short-term loans or borrowing, which we would then pay interest on. So that amount of money, I would caution, if we drop much lower than 20%, there are points in the year where it would be very difficult to meet payroll and our other expenses. An example is the month of January. That's when our liability insurance comes due. That bill on the general fund alone was over $650,000. Plus we have expenses we're paying, our payroll. So imagine if we didn't keep that balance in there to be able to make those kinds of payments, we'd be taking out a short-term loan and paying interest, and we want to avoid that. So that 20% is set aside for that. It's the under-reserved portion that, Mr. Mayor, you mentioned, we're tapping that $3.3 million to operate this year. So that leaves us some balance there for our planning and what we'll be working with you on in retreat to kind of plan for, and then later in the actual budget development, we have that to use as we go forward. But that starts to look like a pretty small amount of money as you start to kind of budget that out over 2 or 3 years, and knowing that our expenses are already over $1 million over our ongoing revenue. So don't want to be doom and gloom, but I'm glad we have that savings. I'm glad we've been able to be good stewards of this budget over the last 2 or 3 years to make sure we're in this position, but it certainly isn't a carefree, we have no worries in the world. We've really got to be watching that as we go forward. Let me go down. So that's kind of that review of where it is with the fund balance, our total revenue, our total expenditures. On this next page, we break out the revenues a bit more. One thing I wanted to point out, the B&O tax came in much closer than what I had thought it would. So it ended the year just under budget by 4%. I have the ability, of course, to look into what's happening in the first couple of months of the year, and our annual filers that are paying that new amount now. It came in really strong for January. We increased the budget slightly on B&O tax for this year, and I would estimate that we should meet that budget. Everything is pointing to that. As you look down the revenue list, you'll notice that because of that overage that we had, most of these are in the positive, which is where ideally you want to see that. Property tax is under slightly because, as I've explained, that budget needs to be over the amount to allow for the collection of past year's taxes, over the levy amount, I should say, to allow for that. Sales tax being 3% over shows that we had a strong year economically. I've said this before, many of the events that we've had presented on help that. People that come into the city pay that sales and use tax, so that's a positive. But overall, that's the picture on where we say estimated actual, that's the actual. So the December and the estimated match here on all of these reports because that is truly what the actual is. On the expenditure side, you can kind of glance down and see some of the places where it went into the unfavorable category in the brackets. The non-departmental one that's rather high is due to those transfers I mentioned. So we transferred some money, both the opioid and then the lease money, and then an additional $500,000 towards saving for future capital needs should we need them. So that covers pretty much all of the kind of high points of the general fund. I'm gonna scroll up here to page 7. And again, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on, I believe it's March 25th at a study session. And we'll kind of peel back some of these pieces of the budget, both revenue and expense, particularly on the general fund, and allow you to learn, I hope, and ask some questions as we get into this and preparing for presentations at the retreat. This page details the fund balance. So the ending fund balance shown for each of the funds represents the total in the fund at year end. So it includes the reserved and unreserved amount. So if you take the general fund as an example, that $6.495 million is both the reserved and unreserved amounts. And then the dollar change between where the beginning fund balance started the year and where it ended the year. And then along with all of our funds, and then pages 8 through 12 take you through each fund. And it provides an overview, a summary, if you will, really of all the revenues and expenses, the ins and outs on each of the funds and where we stand. But we'll be hard at work to prepare the annual financial report, as I mentioned at the start. And I'll work with Mark on preparing a presentation at the study session in March to bring us along further to kind of start looking at this, where we anticipate revenues to be not only in 2025, but 2026, our expenses, how utilizing that ending fund balance can kind of get us through, but really where we need to be mindful of and planning to sustain the budget with the revenues we have. Thank you.
Do you have any comments or questions for Mike?
Question, the opioid money, how much do we have in-house and how much is coming and for how long?
Well, we have about $160,000 roughly. I don't know how much more. We haven't been noticed lately on any more that we'll be receiving. Now, that it may be that we are going to get some more, but we haven't gotten any notice that we'll be.
But we have $106,000 for the opioid issue.
There's some very specific avenues we can spend those funds in that are dictated through the settlement. We don't necessarily have any services within the city of Shelton to distribute those funds. The first settlement way back in 2013, I think.
Or
Funds
2023.
2023, yes, was about $19,000. Those were distributed to the county for use for opioid education, treatment, services. That hasn't been indicated to us if that's been expended or if there is any services providing. So we're waiting on the opportunity to have a broader conversation with Mason County Public Health on where those funds could be dedicated. My goal, part of my work plan this year, is to find a service that is appropriate for those funds and have those expended in our community.
All right, any other questions? I kind of mentioned to Mark a little bit. At what point do we say, okay, we budget conservatively and we seem to do it a little bit better every year? Looking at our little graph here from 18 till now, when can we say that we can use this one-time money for ongoing operations just as part of our process rather than, saying it's one-time money?
Well, I mean, it'll run out, right?
Well, maybe.
Because it's not ongoing. I mean, I'm glad that I was conservative.
Correct. Yeah.
But there's no way to predict both what the economy is going to do. Also, some of that one-time money really isn't necessarily predictable. I mean, the grants are great, the donations are wonderful, but we don't know that those are going to continue. I think we're all hopeful that the permitting continues in the construction, but again, that's somewhat dependent on the economy and what happens.
And we have, with those, we have a commitment to a service, right? So if it's permitting fees, we have to maintain a level of service through our permitting processes at the same time. I think, to kind of, I think, push off and answer your question, I think we can discuss that more through the retreat process and the building of our budget. 2026 budget, we need to be, as Mike indicated, myself and my approach with municipal budgeting is to be very conservative. We have to utilize one-time monies for one-time services. If that means it's limited term positions or one-time projects, that's where I tend to go with these rather than committing any long-term services to these one-time monies and then having us make difficult decisions down the road.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. I'm just looking at the graph and we continually do better. Revenues are a little bit better than we project, which is fine. That's being conservative is great. But at some point, we gotta say, okay, well, now we're doing better every single year. So when can we say, now we can hire that extra janitor that we need, or we can hire that extra officer that we need, or sergeant or whatever? I mean, at what point do we say, are we comfortable doing something like that rather than one-time money is great. I mean, we get to do big projects with one-time money but we're using 1.2 million of the one-time money for next year. We'll probably use $1.2 million for 26 or 1.5. I mean, expensive increase every year. So, but basically it's because revenues are a little bit better than we're projecting. So eventually, do we say revenues, these are what the new revenues are? Can we hire that extra cop now? I mean, how do we figure that out? I know it's a retreat kind of question, but it's kind of a
Absolutely. I think
bit of
that's
thought I've had.
that's a specific conversation we have.
Yeah.
I think we have a better idea of what B and O tax is gonna be now after we've collected for the year and we have those annual collections now. So that trues us up, if you will, for B and O tax collection. So we have a better idea because we did really go into 2024 conservatively with that estimate on those revenues. So yes, that trues us up a little bit as well. But we need to better understand what that 1.2, right? That deficit budget means this year with our ongoing services and how that moves into 2026. We talk about service level discussions. Where are the priorities of the council? Where will those funds be expended if we did take on ongoing costs? That might mean we reduce the service someplace else to increase the service in another division or opportunity within the city. So those are parts of the discussion that we want to have that I'm not aware of that we've had those in the past, in my experience here. So really taking kind of the budget numbers away from that, talking about service level discussions, and that gives us more information where we can go back and build a budget that meets the council's service level expectations.
Can you remind us where we're at? I know there's 1.2 of one-time money being spent, but it's not all ongoing costs. What of ongoing costs exist above ongoing revenue, if you recall offhand?
Well, that 1.2 million represents our expenses that are over the revenue budget. So that's really that amount for 2025. We estimate then that will increase just based on our personnel costs by probably another $250,000. So taking us up to at least 0.5 million. So does that answer?
Yeah, I don't know if we've specifically broken, right, salaries out of that, salary and wages, but we certainly, we can provide you more information there, so you have a better understanding what the ongoing costs are proportionally to that 1.2 million. Yeah.
That gives me another question. So out of the 6.4 or the 33 million, have we now all of the unfilled positions out of that dollar amount, or will that add to it for the any fund or beginning fund balance for next year?
Well,
Makes sense.
those positions many of them are open, so some of them will be filled during the course of the year. The ones we don't have very many, and I think we have 2 in police open. Currently, one's being filled beginning of March. There aren't very many in the general fund that are open, really.
I was talking about last year, 24.
Oh,
Is there any 24 money left in that ending fund?
Sure, some
Sure,
of
yeah,
that's from
okay.
open
Yeah,
positions,
that's-
absolutely.
okay.
Sorry, I misunderstood. Yes. Some of it's due to unfilled positions. Some of it's due to, as I mentioned, we underspent on the jail contract. That's a fairly large budget line. You know, things don't happen quite as quickly in some of our professional services areas, so we underspend a bit there. Now, the intent isn't that we fully expend the expenditure budget. As I mentioned, ideally, I'd like to see it underspent by maybe 3%. We were a little bit closer to that because of the transfers, but that's kind of where we're aiming for it to be under by maybe %, which of our budget represents about $450,000 roughly. So that's still not a whole lot of money in the scheme of our budget. I mean, personally, it might be a lot of money, but in the scheme of the city's budget, it's not.
All right. Anything else? Well, I appreciate it, Mike, and thank your staff for all their hard work. I know we had our audit interview today and it was a very nice audit, except for coding something environmental instead of landfill, which I think is silly, but the audit itself was a very clean audit.
Thank you for being there.
And you and your staff do a wonderful job. And our auditors who tell us that every year. Thank you.
Pass the word on. Thank you.
All right. There are no business items. So we are now at our action agenda. Park and Rec Supervisor Jordan Crumples has information for us regarding the Civic Center rotating art gallery.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. Tonight I have art recommendation on behalf of the Shelburne Arts Commission. We did a call to artists with the deadline of January 31st. We do that through our city social media on online organizations and galleries where we do a call for. And we had a total of 9 artists for this submission. The Arts Commission met on February 4th. The jury the submissions, and we had a total of 5 that are coming through to you tonight. We got Amanda D. Silver with some fabric collage. We got Elizabeth Jacobson with some digital photography. Joanne Dower with some oil. John Belovic with acrylic, and Suzanne Bailey with some collage, paper, and acrylic combination. And this will be displayed March 4th through the end of May. And today we're just looking for final approval. Happy to answer any questions.
Right. Don.
Can't hear nothing. Can't hear nothing, can't see no one.
Yeah.
Hello? Anybody there? Hello? Can you guys see anything? Anybody on Zoom? Can you guys see anything?
Not me.
I mean, neither.
Hello?
I think they kicked us out.
Probably.
That's lovely, right when we got to talk, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Well, I guess they'll pull us back up, maybe.
Wait a minute. Connecting to audio. I don't know who that is.
Are you here for the lifeline?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. You stayed there?
Yeah.
Can anybody hear me?
I can hear you. But I don't think the people, the city people can hear us.
I think we got kicked out.
No, because they keep muting me.
Hello?
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 I think we got kicked out.
I don't know, because it said the host unmuted us or wants us to unmute.